Another day, another file.
Literally, when's our vacation?
Mine's next week. Are you serious, babe?
Hi, my name is Cynthia.
My name is Beatrice and we're here for the case of Blanche Dubois.
Yes, come in. My name's Eldon Torres.
Thank you.
Alright, so we're here today to find out what caused Miss Dubois to be admitted into the mental hospital today. She came in after a severe mental breakdown.
Yeah, her case is a interesting play of multiple Freudian theories, and we were thinking, as psychoanalysis, that her root starts from family complexes.
Of course, her behavior seems to be a reflection of unsolved family trauma taking place in her childhood, and it consists of a lot of decay of the values of the old self. So, should we start analyzing her file?
Alright, let's get started. As stated before, Blanche was admitted after a severe mental breakdown, and she came in carrying a trunk of clothes and a very fragile grip on reality.
Yeah, Blanche Dubois. It says here that she comes from the old South. The lace curtains and the white columns.
Yes. The old self. The time where everyone pretended they had money, power, and glory. But we all know that was just a facade, hiding behind the crumbling white columns.
Exactly. Blanche's family owned Bellerive, which was a great plantation that was the epitome of Southern pride and charm. And from what it says here, we know that the Old South was built on shaky foundations. The economic decline paired with their own questionable spending habits led to the estate's downfall.
Yeah, behind those big white columns was a lot of decay, and she described it to the doctors as, a parade of deaths. She was left to care for all those people in her family, one by one as they were dying.
Exactly, especially with her sister Stella living her best life in New Orleans with her husband Stanley, who we're talking about later, aren't we? Well, anyways, you'd think the family bond would be strong, but I guess not.
That brings us to family complexes. It's important we understand this concept to understand Blanche's situation. Nimitha, you're the best at explaining these terms.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. Family complexes is how our unconscious mind forms while we're young. It stems around how we grow up in our environments, surrounded by our families, surrounded by our friends.
Of course.
And it clearly seems to me that Blanche and Stella grew up at Bellerive together. However, they both ran towards different directions. Stella running towards the future and Blanche running towards the past.
Of course. Well, we can see that Stella wanted freedom and stability, so she left Bellerive to pursue that, while Blanche stayed behind. And by staying behind, she got stuck with carrying the burden of Bellerive's downfall. Her staying behind is kind of like her hanging onto an anchor and saying, "Don't leave."
When she lost Bellerive, she didn't just lose her home, she lost her identity. She lost her family and she lost her home.
Of course. Now she's living with Stanley and Stella. Talk about a clash of cultures. Blanche comes in here all superior and all with her pearls and everything. And Stanley, well, he has a role in all this too.
But let's not forget, her arrival also created tension with Stella. They have trauma from their upbringing, but Stella chose to repress it. She married Stanley and found stability there, even if it's not the kind Blanche would approve of.
Exactly. Stella may have left Bellerive, the plantation, but the moment Blanche arrives, it all comes crashing back, the memories and the feeling and everything. Blanche sees Stella's new life in New Orleans as a betrayal to their old shared values, and Stella sees Blanche as exhausting.
So to sum it up, Blanche's background is a perfect storm of familial guilt, societal decay, and also unresolved sibling dynamics. Add in the pressure of trying to fit into Stella and Stanley's world, I can see why she's here now.
Yeah, and she's trying to preserve a world that doesn't exist anymore. And illusions can only last for so long before reality barges in. And like Stanley, for example. Stanley had a chaotic poker night with his poker buddies? Yep, I did a deep dive on Stanley and Stella.
Wow, and that's why she's here. All of the weight of her past, her family, and her defenses have come crashing down, and that's why we're here to solve why and untangle everything. And while we're at it, let's take a look into Stanley and Stella's backgrounds as well.
Agreed. Let's keep these family complexes in mind as we dig deeper into her case. It's clear that her problems go back to Belle Reve and the ghosts of her past.
Hey, this case kind of reminds me of the play A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams, where the Freudian theory of family complexes is represented through the characters of Blanche, Stanley, and Stella.
Wait, those people have the same names as our patient and her relatives. That's funny. Anyways, I think we can analyze this deeper.
You know what's strange? But I keep coming back to the root of this whole thing. The Old South. It's like the foundation of everything. The idealism, the status, those towering white columns. It makes everything seem so perfect. But we all know that there's a lot of rot hidden inside.
Blanche followed the values of the Old South, and some would even say she was the walking epitome of it. But behind those beautiful white columns is a lot of decay.
Yeah, I'm glad we can all agree and understand that Blanche's collapse started at the Belle Reve plantation. We can trace everything back to that decaying mansion that housed her family, and I guess what's ever left of it.
Yeah, Belle Reve, the symbol of everything that fell apart. Her family's fall wasn't just from lack of resources or money. It was a corruption of values, of identity. That plantation was doomed to crumble from the beginning.
Yeah, and it also wasn't just decay from the outside. It was also decay from the inside. You know, they didn't only lose their land or their wealth, but they also lost themselves. And because the decay was so normalized, it's kind of like the decay was built within themselves, or they were the decay.
Yeah, it's evident that their bodies were used not only for survival, but to maintain this image and this structure of what Belle Reve is. We can see that her family used their bodies in various ways.
Yeah, it's like what Blanche said to the doctor, and I quote, "Our improvident grandfathers and fathers and uncles and brothers exchanged their epic fornications, to put it plainly." She wasn't exactly being subtle about what she meant.
That is not the best dinner conversation now, is it?
It's definitely not.
But I guess from what she said, they weren't only trading their land or their wealth, but they were trading their body and using it as
I
currency.
mean, this is just one big cycle of twisted inheritance. Her family, especially the men, passing down their twisted means of survival.
It's like each generation found a way to exploit itself, until there was nothing left but a former shell of themselves.
That's the sad irony of it all. Her family taught her to use her body as a weapon, but also uphold this image of grace and purity while everything around her was rotting. An admirer of hers named Mitch said that she had a facade covering her internal decay, but when that facade fell through, she had nothing to hold on to.
Yeah, I mean, analyzing from this point of view, you can kind of say she had no choice because this is how she was taught and this is how she was raised. So this is kind of normal to her, and unfortunately, no one was there to help her.
Yeah, it's like a game about maintaining this pure old self-filled image no matter what the cost.
And that's what makes her reason for why she's here so tragic. She thought she can keep up this act of grace and purity and charm and keep her body intact, but eventually that internal decay will catch up to you.
Yeah, her family values were built on exploitation. This is nothing new to her. Well, with that being said, let's continue looking at her file, shall we?
Seems like Blanche was married young. She has an ex-husband. Oh. She had an ex-husband who killed himself. His name was Alan.
Yeah, Stella did mention that Blanche was married at a young age. And if we look at her assessment file, it says that Blanche has PTSD from the death of her husband. And she often hears polka and versi Vienna music when she's anxious. She told the doctors that he was a homosexual and he killed himself because she was making him feel bad. And it also says that she caught him in an act of infidelity.
Wow.
Once she hears the gunshot, which is what she heard when he killed himself, her anxiety is relieved. Wow, this is a lot to take in.
It can be due to the guilt and repression that she feels, that reoccurring music as well as the shock.
Repression ties in with the unconscious and defense mechanisms as well. It's the act of omitting a traumatic memory from our awareness. However, repression doesn't eliminate our painful experiences and emotions. Rather, it gives them force by making them organizers of our current experience.
The death of her husband, Alan, is her traumatic event, and it's stored somewhere in her subconscious, but it seeps through to her awareness in situations where she feels anxious. That's why she hears spoken music when she's anxious. It represents her rising anxiety. And then the shot she hears represents relief. This is how she deals with her traumatic events with defense mechanisms and her unconscious.
Wow, come to think of it, this could be why Blanche uses her body for sex. After the death of her husband, she felt lonely and guilty, and in order to suppress that, she would indulge in excessive sexual relationships.
Yeah, I'd say her collapse started because she feels guilty for causing the death of her
I
husband.
was looking at Blanche's file, and it seems to me like she has a few core issues. The main one that stuck out to me is fear of intimacy.
Yeah, I was gathering that information as well. I was trying to decipher the root cause of these and what led her to develop this fear, and I traced it all back to her husband, Alan. The fear of intimacy, as we know, is intimacy. Fear of emotional involvement with another human being.
Didn't you mention him Amira earlier? What was his name, Matthew?
Pretty sure it was Gilbert.
No, I think it was Billy.
What about Confucius?
No, Jimmy?
What about Sean?
Or Peterson, like my high school English teacher?
Guys, Mitch. It's Mitch. His name's Mitch. He provided us additional information about Blanche. Seems to me like he was a friend of Stella's husband, Stanley. Oh, we still gotta get into Stanley later.
Really? Let me see. It says here that, per his words, she never fully got involved with me or seemed to fully reciprocate my feelings as we, or I, was trying to build a connection. I mean, I told my mom about her. She said she needed someone, and I was supposed to be that someone for her, but that all came crashing down once I found out about her awful past.
Did you guys also know that Blanche had a drinking problem? She kept up her act so well that I wouldn't be surprised if you guys didn't notice.
Well, honestly, I kind of expected it. People often indulge in poor coping mechanisms after traumatic events.
Yeah, I think her fear of intimacy is connected to her drinking problem.
Well, according to the tests and general information that we have of her, it seems like her fear of intimacy did start after the death of Alan, her ex-husband. So maybe she felt guilty and lonely, and that led her to indulge in poor mechanisms of coping, such as drinking, and that's what kind of led her to be here.
Right? Yeah. And if we look at this using Freud's ideas, we can say that her drinking problem was controlled by her id.
Yeah, so the id is the part of our mind that wants to feel instant pleasure without caring about the consequences. Meanwhile, our superego is the part of our mind that tells us the difference between right and wrong, right?
Yeah.
So for Blanche, her id is telling her to drink all her problems away. Meanwhile, her superego is the one feeling all that shame and guilt, making her feel even worse.
And that's why she struggled. She wanted love and stability with Mitch, but her guilt wouldn't allow that. Instead of facing her emotions, her id caused her to drink excessively and avoid the truth.
Did you guys also know that she got kicked out of her teaching job because she was flirting with kids?
What?
That was her id playing in and making her act impulsively. Yep. And her id just wanted comfort and it wanted attention, and it led to all that chaos of her getting kicked out.
Exactly, so her drinking and her reckless behavior are all connected.
And to think that this was all caused by family complexes is insane. We could say that her downfall was influenced by all these factors.
And you know what? The crazy thing is that all of this stems from family complexes. And it doesn't even end there. It started with the plantations in the Old South, Belle Reve, and then it goes into the normalization of her family, of them using their bodies. It goes into her ex-husband, Alan, and then it goes into defense mechanisms, her subconscious. All of this led to her downfall. She led to her own downfall, or she played a part in it.
Now we need to dive deep into how Stella and Stanley both play a big role in Blanche's downfall. As we know, Stella and Blanche are both siblings, so that would mean that they grew up together. But Stella left Blanche in order to find a new life where her family problems would not follow her.
Look at what I found. It's quite interesting. Stella and Stanley, spousal violence. But what's interesting about this is that it's more Stanley implementing pain on Stella. See, if that's the case, why does Stella continue to stay?
I think that's because at Bellerive, there's just so many things normalized. So there might have been some sort of abuse going on, making Stella think it's okay for that to happen.
Yeah, there's actually a big chance of that being true because, as we know, our family complexes make us who we are. And, them being around all that violence and all that negativity when they're younger, they might see this as normal.
Yeah, and I think fear of abandonment is a big role in that too.
Psychologically, that does make sense. That fear could have started from very early on. Blanche leaving, Stella being left to cling on to whoever was around her, right? That could have left her feeling, that fear of abandonment if they were to leave, creating that dependency.
Yeah, and that same dependency is deeply rooted in Stella's emotional attachment to Stanley. Her ego sees Stanley as some source of stability. That's why she stays with him, even if her superego, the part of the mind responsible for morals and social standards, might disapprove of their relationship. The dependency overpowers the logic.
Exactly. It's that dependency that makes her stay with him. And let's not ignore Stanley's personality as well. Blanche perfectly describes it here, and I quote, "He acts like an animal, has an animal's habits, eats like one, moves like one, and talks like one. His raw, untamed side shocks Blanche, but it's exactly what Stella is drawn to."
Yeah, see, Stanley's primitiveness is completely id-driven, and as Freud says, the id is that immediate gratification. Stanley doesn't care about social norms, nor does he care about long-term consequences. He acts on impulsivity. He is literally id itself, in human form.
And Stella, coming from the refined world of old Southern values, finds Stanley's behavior thrilling? His behavior is the exact opposite of the polished, polite life she knew and grew up with. And that attraction to it is her way of rebelling against her upbringing, while somehow finding the balance between it.
Yeah, and that's where Stella's superego becomes conflicted. On one hand, she's trying to keep her ideals of the old self, while her id is trying to keep those ideas of Stanley. And the ego's there in the middle trying to choose between the two. And as we know, Stanley wins in the end.
However, it's also important to note that Stanley's power reinforces her fear of abandonment, right? His dominance makes her feel secure, right? And that makes her feel like no matter how much he harms her physically or emotionally, that she will continue to stay. She convinces herself that it's better to stay instead of leave because of that security that he gives her, which is often and commonly seen in dependency-driven relationships.
Yeah, so we can see how Stella's fear of abandonment, plus the emotional and practical dependency she has on Stanley, makes her feel trapped. His id-driven behavior is chaotic, but somehow she finds it fulfilling, and that just makes it much harder for her to break free.
However, his personality leads him to indulge into his id factor. Did you guys know that Blanche was raped by Stanley?
What?
Yeah, it's towards the end of the file.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my
gosh.
goodness. And Stella, you know what Stella said? Per her own words, she said, "I couldn't believe her story and go on living with Stanley."
Oh my gosh. So Stella and Stanley had a huge role in Blanche's downfall. Stanley raping Blanche and her own sister not believing her side of the story?
Yeah, so now I think we have a better understanding of Blanche with the help of these theories.
Yeah, I'm glad we can sort this out and get to the bottom of this case.
And as you mentioned, Beatrice, earlier, this is how the play A Streetcar Named Desire plays a role using the ultimate Freudian theory of family complex through representing our Blanche, Stella, and Stanley. Case closed.